Okay, Susie, just in terms of time, I think if we kick off and we can add Jenny in.
Absolutely. No problem at all. Thank you so much. So first of all, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the first ITUS Protect webinar, Who Owns Cyber Risk? What Business Leaders Need to Know. We're really delighted to have you join us here today. And I'd like to start by saying I'm Suzie McAneney, and I'm going to be your moderator for today. Now, before we get started, I just have a couple of housekeeping elements that I need to go over. So firstly, this session is being recorded. We will be sharing a link after the session with all registered attendees. We're hoping for the session to run around 50 minutes to an hour. And the session will close with an interactive Q&A. So if at any point during the session you do have a question for our panel, please just pop it into the chat and we will revisit it at that point. So now we've got the housekeeping out of the way. I'm delighted to welcome our panel. As you can see, I am not alone today. So I'm actually going to begin by allowing our panel to introduce themselves. They'll tell you a little bit about their background and I suppose how that relates to today's topic. So I'm going to welcome you first, Clare. So if you'd like to introduce yourself, that would be fantastic.
Yeah, no problem at all. So for the purpose of today's session, which really is around cyber risk, I am Clare Ryan. I am the co-founder of ITUS Secure Technologies. And I suppose in the everyday operations that we're involved in, it really focuses on supporting small and medium-sized businesses to actively manage their cyber risk. So we do everything from looking at the risk assessment elements and seeing kind of where the gap analysis is for cyber risk, and right through into implementing some of the controls that can help prevent a cyber incident, and then ultimately managing that risk in partnership with those small businesses moving forward. But I do wear different hats at different times. One of the other hats that I wear is in data protection. So I'm a certified data protection officer. And sometimes with that role, that actually takes me into helping people who have had incidents and actually reporting those through from a compliance perspective.
Fantastic, that's great. Clare, and Alison, I'll move to yourself. If you could give us a bit of a bio and some insights on yourself, that would be fantastic.
Thank you so much for asking me to be part of this. It's a great panel and a topic which I think is really, really interesting at this time. So my background is I originally had a corporate background, then left that to become a tech entrepreneur. So I've been a serial tech entrepreneur over the last 6 years or so. And one of those startups was a cybersecurity startup. And it was focused on the SME sector, as this really we identified that this is such a key area within the startup ecosystem, within the GDP of every country. It contributes around 90% of employment, and it has a significant contribution to GDP, yet the risk is significant. And so it's really interesting to hear this. And then post startup world, I've now moving into the investor side of things. So again, this is something that I'm asking the companies that I work with from an investor perspective. How are you protecting your business? How are you protecting your supply chain? How are you protecting your customers and clients? So thank you very much for having me here.
That's really super. Thank you both so much. I think that I suppose really displays kind of the depth and the knowledge that we have really on this subject matter coming from a few different angles. So it's really fantastic to have you both here, and we are hoping to get Jenny with us very soon as well. So I suppose just in terms of setting the scene for a wee bit today, really, it is, of course, Cybersecurity Awareness Month. And at this time, it really does, I suppose, cyber is at the forefront of our minds, isn't it? And it really provides us and businesses a unique opportunity to be able to pause, reflect, and review where their organization currently is when it comes to cyber risk. And risk in itself isn't unusual. You know, it's something that as business leaders, business owners, that we're all familiar with. But one thing I would say is that we've really seen cyber incidents making the headlines. You know, it goes without saying, you know, every other day we're seeing something, whether it's Jaguar Land Rover or even in the past 24 hours, the kind of updated guidance that has been issued from the UK government. And that's really where I want to start today's discussion. So Claire, I'm going to come to you first, and I would really love your perspective on, you know, why do you think we're seeing this increase and this rise? You know, what are maybe some of the drivers behind this, or what do you foresee as some future trends when it comes to cyber incidents?
Yeah, so I suppose if you haven't picked up on it on the BBC News in the last 24 hours, they've actually put out some advice from the National Cybersecurity Centre around incident response planning, and the idea having your incident response plan in paper, because obviously if your IT systems are locked down, then you're never going to get at the plan to be able to carry it out if the worst happens to you. So that's the advice that's coming through at the minute. But I suppose really in the last 6 months, there has been a steady stream of information coming through, making headline news, both in the Republic of Ireland and in the UK and in other regions across the world around particularly large-scale cyber incidents. I think there's a couple of reasons for that, because you've asked multiple questions in the one go there, Suzie. So I think the reason, if we take first of all why we're seeing more of it, genuinely, I think the frequency has increased in terms of the number of companies that are actually facing cyber challenges. And I think the impact as a result of those incidents then has also got larger. So if you think about how we do business now in the world, it's very digitally interacted with other organizations, whether that's your customers emailing through orders or you're sending policies or documents back and forth between customers, etc. So there's lots of touch points that you're interacting with and lots of different systems. And because of that, if you have a cyber incident in any one of those players, then you have a massive knock-on effect. So even the incident there recently around not being able to check in at the airport, whilst that was actually a direct impact on the airport, it had a very realistic impact on you and me and everyone else who wanted to use kind of air travel at that particular time, and considerable frustrations. You mentioned about the role of AI. Do I think they're all AI generated targeted attacks? Not necessarily all AI generated attacks, but I think the AI element is an enabling tool for so many of these attacks to actually get through in the first point. It's helping with the velocity of them. And I suppose we could get into AI and security and securing cyber tools with AI, but I think that's a bigger discussion for another day. But I think it is definitely a trend that moving forward, we're going to see more and more of these incidents coming through. The other thing that is coming to mind whenever we think about why we're seeing them is, I think people on the whole want to hold organizations accountable. They're very much as that sense now of looking for organizations to be transparent when something happens and putting their hand up and saying, look, this has happened and here's what we're doing to try and protect you as a data subject who uses our service moving forward. So even if we think about the Marks and Spencer's incident, you weren't able to order online. You couldn't use gift cards that people had purchased for you. So it had a direct impact. So as somebody who had a gift card for Marks and Spencer's, I wanted to know what was happening. When could I actually get back and use the service that I was familiar with and the products that I've chosen? So you do want to see both elements of that. So I think the days of just stuffing it in the drawer and thinking it's going to go away have been left behind by most organizations now. And it's good to see that people are actually being positive and transparent about these incidents and been upfront and saying, look, it's happened and here's what we're doing about it.
I can see Alison has been nodding furiously away there. So Alison, is there anything you'd like to add just on those points that Claire's mentioned?
I think that, we do see, I think seeing the increase is just as Claire has said, that it's no longer a sensitive topic. We used to joke many moons ago, having a cyber attack was a little bit like talking about your sexual health, not for the public domain. But so it's really, I think it's interesting. Is it really an increase in attack, or is it just an acceptance that we need to be transparent and, talk about it and kind of normalize it? And I think it's a little bit of both. There are more attacks and things happening, but a really scary statistic from the UK government 2025 report, which said that 4 in 10 SMEs have a security breach every 12 months. So that's 4 in 10 small and medium-sized businesses, and that's the ones that are reported. What about all the ones that aren't reported? And I really see cybersecurity as a business. I think we need to not think about this as, the little lone hacker or criminal sitting in their dark back bedroom, you know, I want to shut down Marks and Spencers, I want to shut down things. These are large organizations that have customer support, that are, you know, this is a business model, an illegal business model, but still they are doing it in a targeted way, and they're leveraging technology. And the more that we move into a digital first economy, until we have the right protection guardrails and data security in place, it's just going to become and continue to be in the news more and more attacks. And we need to increase the level of awareness.
Absolutely. And I think you've raised so many valid points there that will really resonate with the people who are joining this webinar today. So I think you've given us a really good context there to work with. At this point, we actually want to get a sense of, I suppose, initial thoughts in the room kind of on this topic. So we're going to introduce a little bit of interactivity, which I'm sure everybody enjoys. And we have just popped our first poll into the chat there, so you can have a look there. You can see we're asking anyone who's here today, who do you believe owns cyber risk? So if you just want to cast your votes there, you can see it in the chat, hopefully. And it would be great just to see, I suppose, just the temperature in the room, and you know, sort of who we would attribute this to. So we'll just wait for the results to come in.
Oh, apologies. I had that set as locked. So you should be able to vote now.
We're just making sure everyone's still with us. And I suppose just initially, you know, Claire, do you have any kind of initial thoughts on, you know, potentially what way this poll might go, what, you know, people's perception of this might be, just while we're waiting for a few of these to come through?
Yeah, so I always find this one really, really interesting, because I think it's one of the biggest and the greatest of debates that companies have, you know, who actually owns the risk level. And you see it quite a bit in relation to small businesses. Small businesses in particular will outsource their IT provision. And normally that includes actually outsourcing their security provision with that. So around, believe it or not, 85% of small businesses will outsource that function wholly to a third-party provider, to an IT provider on their behalf. When it comes to medium businesses, it's around 45%. And unfortunately, what tends to happen is some business leaders will actively believe that because you've outsourced the IT function and the cybersecurity function to a third party, that you outsource the risk. That might not be the case. Okay, so I'm going to close this off, if that's okay, and come back in with this one. So I'm going to deactivate that, and hopefully I can see the results, so bear with me. Yeah, so it's quite a mixed bag in terms of kind of the output from that. I think what does concern me a little bit is that the understanding from some individuals that the risk belongs to everybody. And that isn't the case, okay? So everybody within an organization has got a responsibility towards cyber risk, but they don't own the risk, okay? It's the business unit as a whole who owns the risk. So I suppose maybe if I try and explain that in a simple way for everyone, maybe that'll make it a little bit easier for everyone. If I think about I want to drive my car from Belfast to Dublin, okay? That's the aim of my journey. That's what I'm looking to do. The car is the vehicle that I'm going to actually use to get there. Okay. Now a car is made up of lots of individual moving parts, and if each of those parts are working in the way that they should do, and they're maintained in the way that they should do, then I should be able to arrive at my destination safely. Okay. But if I just get into the car and sit there, I'm never going to reach the destination of Dublin. Okay, so I'm never going to actually fully get there. It actually takes me to use all of those parts together and be able to get them to work in a particular pattern to actively get me to my destination. So if you think as the driver, okay, is the CEO or the C-suite of the organization, and the car is everyone in the organization with all of its employees trying to get to that destination. Think then of the board as your sat nav, okay, or your Google Maps. They're guiding you about the best route to get there. They're alerting you to any kind of traffic congestion along the way. They might beep if there's a speed camera along the way, so that you can actually update your behavior and actually change your path as a result of it. But it takes all of those parts together to actually get me to the destination at the very end. But ultimately, without the C-suite, the business owner actually taking responsibility for safely driving there, taking on board everything that comes across on the journey on the way down, I'm not going to get there. And the same thing applies to cyber risk. There's no point of saying, listen, the wheels didn't turn on the car. And that's why we didn't get to Dublin. Well, it took somebody to actually make sure that that was happening, or saying that there was no fuel in the car. Well, who was responsible then for making sure there was fuel in the car? Or I ended up in Cork and not Dublin. Why did I not take advice and guidance? And the same thing applies to cyber risk. It's making sure that the C-suite understand that they have to have oversight on that, and that they have to be in control of all the various elements to be able to deliver a successful outcome for their organisation.
I think it's very helpful, to kind of place it in those real world terms. And it really leads me on to another theme that we wanted to explore today, which was this idea of influencing change. Because, Claire, you were mentioning there kind of about that relationship between the C-suite and, how that kind of trickles down. So Alison, I'm going to come to you for this. What's the biggest mistakes that, you see leaders making when they're trying to get their staff engaged with cybersecurity?
It's mandating it without explaining, using examples and using fear. And I think that that's really not helpful. No one clicks a link intentionally to collapse Marks and Spencer's. That's I don't wake up in the morning and think, what I'm going to do. So I'm not the cyber criminal, so maybe that's what they think. But as with an employee hat on, that's not what I get up in the morning to do. So I think that really that's not helpful. I'm putting it in that mind frame. And so I think that, how can we frame this, and how can we make sure that every individual plays their part is, it has to come from leadership and top down. And it's, I'm not a big fan of these phishing exercises and these trying to trick people into doing it, and to, you click the link, but it was sent from the security company to see if you would do it, to raise awareness. I think that, there's evidence to say that that works, but there's also evidence to say that it doesn't really work. And I think that that just brings in a kind of level of distrust in an organization where you're trying to trick me. And so I see cybersecurity again. I think that that comes from a place of, I'm afraid to talk about it. I'm afraid to acknowledge that, I don't know very much about this. And so I see it from, everybody's on this journey. And it's like, if we use Claire's analogy, if me as an employee, if I'm a tire and that tire is flat, you're not going to go anywhere. So how can we go on this journey together? And it's through education, but it's respectful education. We're not dealing with, it's people in the workplace. We're not children. It's not a room full of 12-year-olds, 13-year-olds and younger or whatever. We're all adults. We have, do you have a minimum level of understanding? Do you understand the implications? A lot of people, they just don't even understand what it means, or they understand the danger. And so it's not scaring them, but bringing them along the journey, telling stories. We are humans, are inherently, we learn through story. And that's how we can go along and own this as individuals. And so I know that Claire did the great analogy about the business owns cyber risk, but I think that you owning it's not enough. It needs the participation, and for everybody to be on the same journey to make it happen. Otherwise, you will not make it to Dublin. So I think it's that respectful storytelling, that everybody's in it together. It's not my responsibility. It's not your responsibility. It's our responsibility. And let me give you the tools to enable you to have that responsibility, have that agency, have that understanding that if it's going to happen, it might happen, but it's not happening because you woke up and decided, I'm going to screw you today. It happened because it was an honest mistake, and just saying that, you know what, you're not in trouble. You've done the training. You've been honest. You've been proactive. And, these things happen. Sometimes, the cyber attacks, they change so frequently. So sometimes it's just, you can't even keep up. as soon as you've got a solution to one, another one's already developed that you haven't got a solution to. So it's an ever changing, ever evolving thing. They're going to happen, and humans are the weakest link. So that we're together on it is really important.
Yeah, and I think that's a really interesting point that you raise, about the human element and things. And I suppose, Claire, has there been any examples where you have seen good practice in terms of kind of culture change and kind of embracing it, or is there any, best practices that you would encourage, businesses to adopt, kind of following on from what Alison was saying there?
I think sometimes in the line of business just that I'm in, when you tend to see significant change within an organization around their approach to cyber risk, it's normally after they've had a cyber incident. And it's unfortunate, but it is true. Something has gone horribly wrong, and it doesn't need to be, a RTE News or a BBC News size event. It can be just somebody has attached the wrong document to the wrong John in the email and sent it off, and now information has left the company without actually approval for that particular person. And then you suddenly start to see organizations, well, they come out with two things. They find all this budget that they never had, first and foremost. Okay, so money becomes available for dealing with what they see as cyber risk. Okay, that's the first thing. And the second thing around that is that they'll have a conversation where they say, nobody told me. If we had knew this was going to be a problem, we would have actually sorted that out before the incident happened, okay? And then they begin to look for an individual. They say, why did you not tell me that? Whether it's the IT manager internally, or sometimes it's head of finance who looks after kind of all perceived risk within an organization, or they go to the IT provider to say, why did you not tell me on it? And that can be great. After an incident has happened, you see all these wonderful bells and whistles and everything else coming into place. But in reality, you really don't want an incident to have to change that attitude with it. In terms of nobody telling them, there are some really useful tools that are out there to kind of help bring the idea about where the risk lies within an organization to the forefront. So when I wear one of my other hats, we have a piece of software called ITUS Protect, and that helps small businesses actually see where the risk is. So you don't need to be a technical person to use this particular piece of software. It's actually designed for non-technical people, but it'll help you to see very clearly if you've got a gap, and it'll help you give some advice about how you can fix that gap. So you can talk to your IT provider or your internal team. I think, unfortunately, what does happen, and it's picking up a wee bit there about what Alison said, is whenever there is an incident, people are afraid nearly to put their hand up and say something has gone wrong. Nobody does want to be the person to say, I clicked on that link, and then everything stopped and shut down because I clicked on the link. And there is real fear among some employees that if you say something happened, that actually you could end up losing your job, or you'll never be considered for promotion as a result of that. And that's really not the attitude that you want within any organization. Cyber involves trust. You need to have a secure and trusting environment that a member of your team can put up their hands and say, look, this went wrong, or something is not quite right with my systems, or my 4-year-old was on my laptop, and now all of these flashing lights are there and pop-ups are appearing everywhere. Have the conversation and be comfortable to be able to bring that forward so that you can actually create real change out of that. Like, I've been in incidents where there's been cyber incidents in companies, and the head of IT has literally been thrown up in the corner because the stress was so immense on them, because they felt that this was all their fault, and it wasn't. Incidents will always happen. And the learning here really needs to be, just like the BBC says today, is how are you going to respond? Okay. And for any business leader, this really is about having that response plan in place. There's no point working out how you're going to put out a fire once the building is alight. We all do fire drills. We all know the 999 protocols. We have our fire extinguishers in place. We practice everything to make sure everybody gets out safely if you have an incident. And the same thing should happen with cyber. Okay, you need to have a thought about how you're going to deal with that. And for any organization, that's how you're going to limit the damage. Okay, so cyber doesn't just have a financial impact. Yes, you could be looking at new equipment, and you could be looking at whether the debate is there, should you pay a ransom, should you not pay a ransom, how are you going to deal with that, etc. But there's the real reputational damage. Who wants to be doing business with somebody who's continuously down because of cyber, or who has no control over their cyber? Very few people want to do that. So if you can take reactive measures, it works better.
Yes, and I think that actually really helps lead us on to another area that we wanted to cover in today's session, which was around growth and scaling companies and startups. And this was an area we wanted to look at in terms of, I suppose, the investor perspective. So, Alison, I'm going to come to you on this. So, as an investor, for you, what does good cyber risk management look like in a startup?
So I think that my answer is it depends, right? If you're at an early stage and you have an idea, it's going to be very low, right? As soon as you start developing a tool, right, or a platform or some kind of tech product, and you have a developer, if your developer is not considering data sovereignty, cyber security at the very foundational build start, you have the wrong developer. It's as simple as that. It's the wrong person, because you're going to have so many backdoors. You're going to have, weaknesses. You're going to be plugging, that barrel that has lots of holes in it, and you're going to be continually patching. So, as a founder, you need to ask that question from the very, very start: is how can we make sure we have, we are protected from that very, very early stage. Now, assuming that has been done, and you're moving later on, if at board level, every board, for me, if you're generating revenue, you need a board, right? And that's going to help for your growth and scaling later on. But as you get customers and things, you have to have that cyber aspect as you bring on a team. But at board level, they should be reviewing a risk register annually, right? It can be rolling, whatever way mechanism and time frame works. If cybersecurity and data security is not on that risk register, that is a massive red flag, because it means you're not taking it seriously. And from an investor perspective, I want to see that. I want to see that it was discussed at a board meeting. I want to see that your developer has a cyber protection plan and has considered it at very basic build and then growth stage and how you're going to do it. I want to see that you're not sharing passwords because you can't afford Gmail for everyone. So you have one shared email and everybody has the password and you're texting each other the little code. That's a red flag to me. Now, I understand that sometimes that might happen for whatever reason, and we're not condoning that. That's at the stage where it is your very, very early stage. Once you have a product and once you are scaling and growing, if you're still doing that, an investor red flag. Absolutely. So it's just thinking about it from the onset. Data security, data sovereignty, where's it at? Who can access it? And that's, we're not necessarily talking, data points for an algorithm or something like that. Customer information, customer emails, phone numbers, bank account details, addresses of employees. These are all data points. And so if you're just saving them on an Excel spreadsheet on your hard drive of your laptop, maybe not the best idea. So it's how can you make sure that you're protecting and having these conversations from the outset?
No, I think that's really helpful. And there's really a lot in there. And I suppose, Claire, another question would be, what role does insurance play, whenever it comes to cyber risk? I'm just conscious that was another area we wanted to tap into today.
Well, yeah, I will do that one, but I'm going to pick up just on something Alison said there. Okay, so I completely agree with what she's saying. Okay, and when you're in startup build mode, because I've been there is a limited budget to start off with, and you do the best with what you can get. But once you take on those initial the first tranche of money in, I'll put my hand up and say my investors asked me to fill out a cyber disclosure form about where my data was held and what controls I have in place. Okay, because it is an investment and investors expect returns. So, you have been given that money to multiply it on their behalf, not to allow someone to take it as part of a ransom. And I know that there are a number of startups who have actually signed up for this webinar to find out what they can do and how that actually impacts on them. I will caveat with, particularly as you start to go through the seed stage and you're going into the scaling stage with startups, your IP becomes incredibly valuable. So the more you get known within the sector, people actually see value in your IP. So having your IP stored in somebody's personal G drive, their Google Docs or something like that, or on a laptop, is not good risk management from a business perspective, because if you fall out with that person, then you don't have access to that information. The other thing I will flag is, and it was one we did see on the news, is around the CrowdStrike incident that happened this time last year, last September, okay? Shareholders there have sued the directors of that company for negligence because the share value, whilst it's floated on the stock market, took a hit following that particular incident. And it wasn't cyber related, that was a poor rollout of a technology upgrade and a patch for them, but it caused massive outages and it impacted on multiple people's brands, and they have taken lawsuits against CrowdStrike as a result of that. So if you're not proactively managing that risk, whether you're a small startup to the best of your ability with the budget you have, or you're starting to scale, there is financial repercussions out the other end of that. No investor wants to see kind of their money going the wrong way. And I suppose it brings us into the insurance question there we are asking, Suzie. So insurance is the last stage in risk management, okay, for any type of event, whether that's travel insurance, health insurance, car insurance, back to our analogy earlier, where you actually say, right, we've done all the mitigation we can and we'll transfer that last bit off to a third party who'll have the financial capabilities to support me if something happens, okay? So cyber insurance is an actual product that you can get. You no longer have cyber cover within any general business policy. It's an active exclusion. So one key takeaway from this session is, if you haven't read your business policy, go and look it up and go and pick up the phone to your broker and ask, do we have cyber or do we not? Okay, it's an extra policy in place. I've been chatting with some insurers recently and they've told me that they pay out 98% of claims that come in through cyber insurance. Now that's a phenomenal statistic, okay? It is a phenomenal statistic to know that you would have cover in place, provided that you've done everything in your power to manage that risk. Okay, so you need to know what controls you have in place and you need to actively manage the risk. But it is possible to have a policy there that'll give you that financial support, the incident response support, the PR response support, and the legal advice if something goes wrong. So it's worth looking into.
Perfect. No, I think that was really, really helpful, Claire. And we are actually now at the part where we are going to move into the Q&A. So we had actually received a couple of questions prior to the webinar, so I'm going to start with one of them, if that's okay. So if an organization was breached tomorrow, could the directors find themselves personally in the firing line? So I'm not sure who would like to tackle that one first.
I'll take a bit first from a practical perspective. Maybe Alison will chip in as an investor. Okay. I suppose practically, it really does depend on how that incident has occurred. Okay. How good are your systems that you're able to come back and say, look, this was, for example, a 0-day attack, something that hasn't been seen anywhere else. And that's how we've been caught. Or if you're able to come back and say, look, hands up, the mistake was ours and that's where we went with it. It is worth understanding that your customers who have contracts with you may hold you liable if your cyber incident has an impact on their organization. So you, again, as a director, making sure you have correct insurances in place to be able to absorb that. So for example, if we look at the Jaguar Land Rover incident, that has resulted in lots and lots of their smaller suppliers down chain having to actually lay off employees because the work wasn't there and there wasn't a cash flow coming through to meet the wages and everything else that actually went with them. And it's through no fault of the suppliers down chain, but ultimately they're looking for redress from Jaguar Land Rover because that's the reason why they're not able to meet their bills and not able to keep their employees on board. So as a director, and part of your director's kind of obligations, making sure that you have managed that risk and you have some sort of protection to put that off against it. But as a director, you will be the person that has to report it out to your customers, report through to any sort of regulatory bodies, and be able to report to your board, who are your investors.
Anything to add on that, Alison?
Yeah, I think Claire's really hit it on the head. I think, there is a responsibility there. I think, is there a liability? It depends, as well, if you have kept them informed, if you have reviewed it, is there, what is the status, or if it's on the roadmap, that, you know, you're doing this and then you're going to have a big, you know, security review at the end of this part of the build or in 6 months' time, then, you know, it's all about keeping them informed and having that conversation, because then you're in a much better place. And having it on the roadmap, I would say, the like in pink neon flashing lights, don't hide things. Don't hide things from your board. Don't hide things from your shareholders and directors. And that is just going to get you in trouble. And so it's just about communication, you know, acknowledge where you are. This is the plan, and what this is the timeline for the plan, and having and making sure that it's reviewed at board level annually. You know, just it goes a long way. Can't solve all your problems, but it goes a long way.
That's
And I'm
really
going to
helpful.
I'm going to
Sorry, go
add
on
one
ahead.
more point to that. Just there will be lots of startups maybe who are joining the session who are maybe slightly earlier in stage, and they're starting to reach out to different advisors as part of growing that board. They maybe don't have a formalized board, but they have a team of advisors. And the one thing I will urge again is about having a healthy professional skepticism in terms of who you bring into your inner circle, in terms of the inner working of your startup. Particularly, you do have to have open conversations with your advisors and with your board particularly when things go wrong. But when you're taking advice and guidance from people, make sure that you've tested that against 2 or 3 people to make sure that that is the best advice that's coming through, and not maybe just one person's advice that could actually put you into hot water later on.
Super. We do have time for one more question that again had been submitted earlier. So in your experience, what's the biggest barrier to effective cyber risk management in SMEs?
I'll leave that one for you, Alison. Do you want to have a go at that? Oh, you're on mute, Alison.
Oh, Alison, you're muted.
Oh, I'm stalling. No, can you just repeat the question, because you broke up a little bit?
Of course. In your experience, what's the biggest barrier to effective cyber risk management in SMEs?
I think there's two, because I'm never going to give singular answer. I think it's time and understanding. I think that, you know, I'm going to, that comes with the caveat that assumes that they have the funds available to have a level of protection and systems in place. And now that barrier to entry and cost is much lower than it used to be. So there's really no real excuse for not having those in place. So I'm going to assume that that's in place. SMEs, owners, founders of SMEs and startups are the busiest people on the planet. They're doing everything themselves, and cybersecurity is just another thing. And so it's, where do they prioritize that within their day to day, within their meetings, within their roadmap, within their contract reviews? Is it a question that's going to come up with their suppliers, with their service providers? So it's, where is that in their priority list? And even I do know someone who really hated as a passion cybersecurity, and they put a post-it note right beside the screen of their computer so that they would always be asking the question, because they didn't like it, but they understood the risk. And that kind of leads into the second part, which is time and education. A lot of people, you know, we see the big ones in the news, and it's like, okay, but that's not relevant to my business, because the news isn't reporting on, you know, the small and medium-sized businesses that are hacked and the impact they can have. It could be, you know, a legal firm that is holding funds to purchase a house, and the legal firm is hacked and those funds disappear. You don't see that in the news. That happens, you know, that's not uncommon. You hear a little bit about the phishing and the phone scams and things like that, but it's just educating yourself that, you know, there's more than just that type. It can be, I think Clare gave a great example earlier about just, you know, sending a document to the wrong person and sending it to Alison McMurtrie. And, you know, I've got 5 Alisons, and I was sending it on Friday afternoon or just at the end of the day, and it went to Alison McCann, right? That is a data breach. It's the same thing. And so, but people don't consider that as a breach. And so that's where the educational piece comes in, is about what does this actually mean? What should I be looking for? And how should I prioritize it?
And I think if I can pick up just in that, but Alison, just, and then I see we've one more question in on the chat that I'll come to. But I do think that part of this is fear and embarrassment together. There really is a fear that just because they don't want to ask about something they don't know or don't fully understand because they think people will ridicule them. You know, they might be running a multi-million-pound company, but nobody wants to go, I don't understand what endpoint protection is. Can you explain that to me? And I think we need to get over that hurdle. We need to get over that hurdle, and we need to be more comfortable asking. Like they say, there's no silly question or stupid question, and that is particularly true when it comes to cyber. Just get comfortable asking about it. Nobody's going to laugh at you. Get the right information and then be able to adapt to that.
Super.
Okay.
I'm just mindful of time, and I really want to squeeze Kieran's question in.
Yeah, and I'm happy to take that. Yeah.
Super. So Kieran has asked us, I wanted to ask about outsourcing development of a platform to a different country. So Claire, take your time to give some feedback on that.
So we've done that, Kieran. Okay, I'll be open and honest about it. We have a development company who has helped build our software, who sits in another country within the European Union. So when it does come to outsourcing in general within your business, okay, you need to have a really strong and robust due diligence process. So you need to look at who that company is, okay? Look about how many people are part of that team and where those team are working from. And that's particularly important now that we have so many hybrid workers, okay? So if those workers are predominantly based in an area where there is a strong reputation of cyber incidents or financial crime associated with it, I would really guard against particularly that element of it, because you don't know where your information is going to and what's been baked into your code as a result of that. You want to go out and speak to their customers, and ideally you would want those customers in the same sector that you're working in. So for us, we went out and found, right, have they done all our insurtech or fintech products that are out there in the UK or Ireland? So somewhere where we could actually go and physically meet those customers and get an idea about, right, what's it like to work with this particular organization. You want to have a very robust contract in place with them around ownership of IP and making sure that all of that ownership of IP retains to the company, okay? And that you set up all of your code repositories and everything else and give them access to that. So don't be using anything that belongs to them. You hold all of the keys to the kingdom and they put everything into that. And you want to have a third party check what they're doing very early on. Don't be waiting until the end of the project and you're ready to pay for everything and everything has to be signed off and accepted to get it checked out that it's actually there and in place. So there's nothing wrong necessarily in outsourcing it to a third party, whether that's IT or building a particular product and doing the code with it, right? But this comes down to how you manage that level of risk, taking advice on board, okay? And if you don't have the technical know-how, how to steer that conversation, bring somebody with you who does. And there's loads of people in the startup network in particular who will come along and guide you and ask the really difficult and awkward questions and will spot something that smells off a mile away and be able to challenge them, okay? So that's my advice around that. I would also make sure that whatever organization you're using, you call out in advance about the security features that you need to have in there. So Alison mentioned it at the beginning about secure by design in terms of the product. All too often you get companies when you say, look, and it needs to be secure, and they go, yeah. And then you find they don't have the basics in place. And they said, well, it wasn't part of the tech spec that you had asked us to do. So you want to call it out to the nth degree, what level of security you want in place. And you want to make sure that they have some sort of certification with that. So the likes of their ISO 27001, check the awarding body when it was done, because that means that they operate with good security principles internally as a business, because they're a business as well. Okay, so you want to make sure that they're doing the best that they can with security so that it feeds into how they work with you. So those are my top tips. Definitely worth exploring, but just stay away from certain territories where there's high incidence of kind of cyber criminal activity.
Fantastic. Is there anything you wanted to add to that, Alison? I noticed you nodding along there, or maybe it's just more of the same.
Yeah, no, I think it's very much more of the same. I think just slightly maybe off topic and more from a generalist perspective, offshoring, it can be fabulous. Ask for who their clients are and be able to speak to some of their other clients. There's always the risk that they're just going to repackage your ideas and your technology and provide it for someone else with just some very minor tweaks. So it's all about protecting your IP, protecting your idea, protecting the way that you're laying out in your code. And then what's the recourse on that? Is there any recourse on that? And again, that comes down to contracts and doing your due diligence beforehand. If you talk to some of their clients and they're like, yeah, I think they came recommended to me. They're quite cheap, but I think they used my code for someone else because it looks the way their system runs. It looks exactly the same way as mine, and you don't know how are you going to check that and tell. But that is an infringement on IP. But again, it's making sure that you own that IP and making sure that that's documented rather than giving it to them and then being able to use it, but understanding what's the recourse if you're able to prove that that is the case.
That's really, really insightful. We've covered so much ground today, and I think just before we close, it would be fantastic if I could just have one quick tip from you both, just 30 seconds a minute. If there was one thing that our attendees, could do tomorrow to strengthen their cyber risk management, what should it be? Just really quick, 1 minute, something really simple.
Yeah. So I'll go first, and I'd be remiss for not mentioning it. Today is the last day of Windows 10 as an operating system receiving patches from a security update perspective. So unfortunately, we see it all too often. People are using legacy pieces of hardware or software, okay, because they think it's going to save them some money. And actually, that's not the case, okay? The data breach or the cyber incident is going to cost you a hell of a lot more than the new PC or paying for the subscription of the piece of software that you actually need. So my one bit of advice is budget for it. Stop using Windows 10 and plan to replace it.
Very timely, Claire. I like the way you brought in the Windows 10 stuff. Very good. What about yourself, Alison? What would your quick tip be for our attendees?
I think is talk about it. Absolutely, stick it up on your beside on a post-it note beside your screen so that it's front of mind. But don't be afraid to ask those questions. I don't know what password manager should I be using? Do I need a password manager? Is the Google one or the Apple one on my phone, is that enough? Or, is it okay to have it on my personal ones and my work ones? Ask those questions and just explore so that you can build up your own defense. And I think that's just take it from a perspective of inquisitiveness, not guilt. It's just, I am interested in this and I want to know more. How can I learn more?
Fantastic. And with that, we are approaching the last few minutes of our session. So I just wanted to first of all say thank you to our speakers for joining me today. Thank you so much for your time and the insights and everything that you've shared. Thank you to everyone who has joined us for the webinar, whether you are with us live at the moment or you're watching the replay. As mentioned at the beginning, we will be sharing a link to this recording after the session, and it will also be uploaded to the ITUS Protect YouTube channel. We will be issuing a short feedback survey as well. So if you could give us some feedback, that would be really helpful. It just helps us prepare for future webinars as we are planning to host more of these. Please do follow us on ITUS Protect. You can find us on LinkedIn just to stay up to date with our events and news and so on. And we've also dropped a link in the chat if you would like to book a link with our team and you can learn a little bit more about ITUS Protect there. And lastly, Alison and Claire, where is the best place to connect with you? Where can people find you?
You can get me if you follow our ITUS Protect LinkedIn page. It's probably the best one that you can get all the up-to-date information. And we have a newsletter on there as well, so feel free to subscribe for that to get access to all the information that we have.
Fantastic. And yourself, Alison?
You can find me on LinkedIn.
Super. And with that, I'm going to close the session. So thank you so much to everyone for joining us today. We'll be in touch. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Perfect, guys. Thanks. Bye. Bye.